A lot of African countries are moving from eating those high grain, high rich in fiber foods to actually, because of urbanization, they're moving to the more fatty foods. Fast foods are actually a lot more around the continent, and so diet is actually a major contributing factor, especially to things like breast and ovarian cancer. I won't get into the details of that today, but then they are actually major contributing factors to DNA mutations, which can lead to cancerous cells. And sexual freedom. Long ago, because of the male patriarchal system here on the African continent, a lot of women didn't really have much say in how, like in sexual behavior or things like family planning and how they really wanted, when they were ready to have kids or not, or anything of that nature. And the availability of contraceptives and talking about family planning has actually kind of increased the risk, especially for women, to get certain cancers, because in those drugs that either they are hormone, like estrogen inducing drugs, or maybe birth control pills, they also have been known to actually contain some elements that could potentially cause cancer later on in the future. And so that has also increased the number of cancer incidences. And smoking, as you all know, smoking alone is the #1 cause of cancer, #1 cause, and it causes a lot of deaths, like in the cancer world, I guess. But anyway, so more and more people are beginning to smoke on this continent. It's beginning to be more acceptable, not only to the males, but also to the females, and in different areas, especially among us young people. A lot of people are beginning to smoke, and so that also increases our chances of getting things like lung cancer. And drug availability. Now, as you know, if you have a headache, you want to get painkillers. It's a very basic example, but more and more drugs are available on the, by drugs I'm talking about like medically prescribed drugs, just in case. And more of these are actually available on the African continent, and with every drug comes certain side effects. And sometimes here in Africa, because we don't really have our own resources to actually manufacture our own drugs, we end up importing drugs that might not be of the best quality, or might not be really like completely safe for us to use, but then because that's what we can afford, we use it. And then as we use more and more of those, we're also most likely to get cancer. And physical labor as well, as I said, because of urbanization, our lifestyles are changing from working all the day in the field to actually being in an office and actually just chilling and not doing any exercises. And infectious disease is also another thing. Now, all of you know about the main infectious disease here in Africa, HIV, malaria, and all that. But then one thing that I was surprised by finding is really the fact that HIV/AIDS is actually linked to a certain form of cancer, which is called Kaposi sarcoma. And I'm going to talk about it a little bit here and how it's linked to that infectious disease. So Kaposi sarcoma is it's extremely rare in the world. Like, it's one of the least occurring cancers, but then it's most commonly diagnosed here on sub-Saharan Africa. And it was one of the first clinical manifestations to be reported in HIV infection, and has become a main characteristic of AIDS. And so with the increased rate of HIV and AIDS infection, more and more people are most likely to actually get Kaposi sarcoma and probably die from it, because that's when AIDS has reached that advanced stage. And so in as much as our health systems are trying to focus so much on infectious disease such as HIV and AIDS, they're also kind of ignoring the fact that it's coming with an accomplice, which is cancer, which is something that we need to take care of. And finally, I'm going to talk about the next step. Can Africa actually be an Africa without cancer? So far, Africa is at a stage where cancer is not so big, but it's slowly on the rise because of the changes that I mentioned. And so I just want to take us to, these are just my recommendations of what I think the continent can do to make sure they keep this disease in check and in control before it becomes one of our major one of the things we're fighting against, such as infectious disease and poverty. And so I thought of a 3-way strategy. The first one would be to inform people about cancer. So many myths are going on about cancer, and so we need to raise awareness and reduce the spread of cancer, and also reduce the stigma, so such that when a person has cancer, they don't feel like, oh, I'm bewitched, so I'm a bad person and I can't go and get help at the doctor, but then they know they can actually do it. So we can use the use of media, the use of curriculums in our schools to actually involve this non-communicable disease, cancer, in workplaces, road campaigns, using flyers, different methods that the government and also us as a people can use to inform one another about cancer. And also, health-wise, I think the health care systems in our countries have a responsibility to invest some of the many funds that we get to actually focus on treatment and curing of diseases into cancer, like to get information about cancer. They need to understand the extent and the incidences of cancer occurring in their country such that they know exactly how to deal with it, where to tackle, where to even spread this information, where to target which groups and everything. And they also have to put like some of the funds into cancer research, which is my last point. And this is really a long-term step because right now we do not have the resources to actually start researching on cancer here on the continent. But by partnering with other organizations, eventually we will be able to do this and then start focusing our research on Africa-specific cancers such as Kaposi sarcoma, because at this point, no company from outside would want to research on it when they also have problems in their country and they're trying to deal with the different several most occurring cancers in their countries as well. And so in conclusion, I would like to leave you with a quote, which is by Alan Milburn, who is the former Minister of Health in the UK. And basically he said this in a cancer conference, which a lot of health ministers from our respective countries went to in 2002. And he said, in Africa, literally every day, hundreds and possibly thousands of people die endlessly in pain from cancer, for what of pain relief that could cost literally pennies rather than pounds. It's true the basic infrastructure and resources to cope with the new health epidemic, which is cancer, is basically not there, but we have to do something about it. We know that there's a steam train that is coming down the track, and I'm sure he's referring to cancer here, and he says, and we have a choice. We can either build some new track or we can wait for the train to hit us. And so I'd just like to leave you with those words to say that it's your responsibility to actually spread awareness about cancer in your community. And it's our country's responsibilities to make sure that cancer really stays in control. We built this new track instead of waiting for it to hit us and then try to fight it in this continent that already has a lot of challenges facing it. Thank you.
Okay, any questions for Belinda?
Okay, it might be my myth, but we always think of cancer as being an old person's disease, and therefore countries that have longer life expectancies will have higher cancer rates. Did you come across that? Have you seen anything about that?
Yes, it is true. It makes sense because as we grow up, our DNA constantly mutates. Some mutations are very, like they don't affect anything, and other mutations are actually harmful. Mm-hmm. But as you grow older, your mutations will accumulated, and so your chances of getting cancer are more. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, there are a lot of other things that are affecting young people. For instance, with Kaposi sarcoma, for instance, almost all the diagnoses are actually of people below the age of 45. And so while it's true that you're at greater risk as you get older, as you get younger, there are other factors as well that actually increase your risk for getting cancer.
What steps do you see being taken to fight cancer in Africa right now? Do you find much in your research?
At this moment, I think the step that is most feasible is raising awareness. I came across, during my research, I came across a lot of organizations that have actually begun to try and take an active role, like by taking cancer walks and having, I don't know, breast awareness week in different African countries, and they're mainly focused, these organizations have been created here in Africa for the African continent, especially for sub-Saharan Africa. And so I think that's the most feasible step, to actually get people to know, because if I don't know that smoking can cause me that much harm, then I'm still going to smoke, and if it's acceptable in my community, then there's no need for me to stop. But once I know that tobacco contains carcinogens that could actually lead to lung cancer, then it's easier for me to change my lifestyle. So I think at this point, the most important thing is for us as Africans to try and focus on a change in behavior and a change in lifestyle, which will decrease the cancer occurrences from actually happening, because now we're less at risk and exposure to actually get cancer. And so I think that would be the most feasible at this point, because in terms of research, I'm not exactly sure how financially capable we are, or even like if we have the academic pool, the scientists who are actually experts, and we can be able to research and come up with significant things to contribute into the research for cancer.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Belinda.